Hi, this is Jennifer from Read It Again. Please join me while I read Part 2 of The Silver Bracelet from the Unicorn Secret series by Kathleen Duey. Please consider subscribing, and if you enjoyed this book, hit the like button and share this video with all your friends. Kip! He looked up at her. Stay there, Hart said. She ran to the entrance. When she peeked out, she saw people coming out of the trees at the far end of the meadow. They were dressed in bright colors. Some led ponies, and as they walked, they jingled. Gypsies? Hart ducked back inside. She had heard about gypsies all her life, but they rarely passed through Ash Grove. Why would they? Tin Blackaby wouldn't pay for their shows, and the villagers had no money to spare. Hart inched forward to peek outside again. Some of the women wore long, swirling skirts. Some had wide, billowing trousers like the men's. The men's sleeves were gathered and full. All of them, even the toddling babies, wore wide sashes that dangled rainbows of silk tassels. Hart watched them come up the slope in a ragged line. They were heading straight toward her. They were carrying bedrolls and blankets. Hart's stomach tightened as she realized that her cave was their cave, and they intended to shelter in it for the night. Hart knew one thing. She couldn't let them see Moonsilver. Stay inside, Avamere, Hart pleaded. The mare shook her mane and tossed her head. Keep Moonsilver with you, too, Hart added, then stared at the colt. He switched his long tail back and forth. Hart took a deep breath. If she waited any longer, the gypsies would be too close. She stepped out of the cave into the late afternoon sunlight. The gypsies stopped, hands on hips, glancing at each other. Hart's pulse was a quick-time hammer. Would they hurt her? Hart stood still, her breath uneven. Suddenly, the gypsies walked back down slope. They picked a place in the meadow to set up camp. Hart stepped back into the cave entrance, then watched. The gypsy women made a fire, a big fire. They stood around talking. Bursts of laughter came from the children. The sun was setting. It'd be dark soon. Hart clenched her teeth. She had been so careful with her cooking fires, and now these gypsies had built a bonfire anyone could see. Wait here, she told Avamere and Moonsilver. You have to stay hidden. She looked at Kip. Don't follow me. Kip tilted his head and whined, which meant he had understood and didn't like it one bit. Hart started down the slope, her feet heavy as lead. One of the gypsy children looked up. She's come out. All the gypsies turned to look up the slope. Hart slowed. Many of them were smiling at her. It surprised her. They didn't look angry about her using their cave at all. We were going to ask you if we could at least bed down inside, the boy shouted. Hush, Davy, the old man said to him. Davy grinned. Zim thought it would be best to bring you a bowl of stew to bargain with. He gestured toward the old man. The instant he said it, Hart smelled the deep, wonderful aroma of a real supper cooking. We've got grand biscuits, too, a merry-faced girl called. Davy smiled. That's Fiona. She made the biscuits. Hart blinked as the gypsies laughed. She had never in her whole life been around so many friendly people. Where are your folks? Davy asked. Where are you from? She looked at him. Ash Grove, but I don't have any folks. One of the older women made a clucking sound of dismay. None? You can't be out here by yourself. Can you, dearie? Hart backed up a step. Sorry, she had spoken. She couldn't explain herself to these people, and if they saw the unicorns... You could come with us then, Davy said. There was a general sound of agreement. The old woman who had called her dearie was nodding. Do you juggle? Can you dance? Hart shook her head, confused. I'll teach her, Davy said. Look how little her feet are. She'd be a perfect perfect doll up there." Hart stared at him. Up where? She had no idea what he was talking about. "You'll need an act of some kind," the older woman said. A man across the fire nodded. "A little thing like you can do most anything and people will applaud. But you'll grow, so it's best to learn something and—" He stopped suddenly and stared past her. Hart turned to see Kip racing down the hill. "Kip!" she shouted. "Stop right there!" Kip slid to a stop and sat down, tilting his head. A murmuring went around the fire. "She has a touch with animals, don't she?" the man said and laughed. Hart sighed. The fire was warm, and they were all smiling at her. She smiled back, wishing she belonged to them. "Would you look at that?" one of the men said in a low voice. He was pointing. Hart turned back toward the cave. Avamir was standing in the opening, peering out, and beside her was Moonsilver. His horn glistened in the dusk. Uh-oh. Everyone was staring, talking in excited voices. "You clever child," the older woman said, coming around the bonfire to look into Hart's face. "We've heard the tales, of course. Some guard claims he saw a unicorn." Hart swallowed hard, confused and uncertain what to say. "I'm Binny," the woman said, smiling. "That one named me." She pointed at Davy. "She's my Granny Benadell," he explained. "When I was little, I couldn't say it right. So he called me Binny, and Binny I became," the woman added. She faced Hart. "Now tell us how you did it." "Please," Davy added. Hart glanced at him, her pulse speeding up. "Pine gum to stick it on?" Davy asked. "What is it, a goat horn?" "Whatever it is, we should have thought it up," Hart heard a man mutter. "Folks are going to line up to see this." All at once, Hart understood. The gypsies thought Moonsilver was a colt with an old goat horn stuck on his forehead with sticky tree sap. They thought she had done it to make money. Hart exhaled loudly. Then she cleared her throat. "Well, he's white, like all the legends say. And so Hart trailed off. She was not used to lying. Binny laughed, lifting her eyes to the dusky sky. "Rumors also say a little girl stole the horses. Did you?" Hart straightened her spine. "I paid Simon. He lied, and that's plenty." Binny waved one hand in the air. "I can hear the truth in your voice. The rest is your business." She gestured up at Moonsilver. "Jacob is right. People will line up. You are very clever." Hart let out a slow, careful breath. Binny looked at her, dark eyes steady. "Why you're alone is your business, so long as your troubles bring us no harm." Hart told the truth. Tin Blackaby's men might be searching for me. Binny nodded slowly. "People look for us too sometimes." Everyone laughed. Binny hushed them. "Do you want to be found?" Hart shook her head. "Will they follow you to Derrytown and beyond?" Binny's eyes were sharp. Hart thought about it. Beyond Derrytown? Tin Blackaby's men never even rode all the way to Derrytown. No one from Ash Grove went that far. "No," she answered. "What's your name?" Binny asked. Hart told her. "Then join us, Hart, do," Binny said. "We're off to Derrytown with many stops in between here and there. Then on to Yolan's Crossing and Sand Coville and—" "What?" she asked, peering into Hart's face. "I've never heard of those places," Hart said quietly. Binny laughed again. "Nor have the people there heard of your little thatched roof Ash Grove. If you go far enough, you will find people who haven't heard of your Lord Dunraven." Hart caught her breath. "Is that true?" Benny nodded, her eyes twinkling. Hart smiled. Then her eyes flooded with tears. Maybe she'd never see Ruth again. Zim pointed to Kip. How well is he trained? Hart realized Kip was wagging his tail, staring at her. He's smart, Hart said. I've never taught him tricks. Call him, Zim said quietly. Kip, Hart said, will you come down here? She heard the gypsy children giggling. Kip lunged into a headlong run. Sliding on the snowy patches, he charged down the slope. He skidded to a stop beside Hart. There's a dog that knows good biscuits when he smells them, Fiona said. Everyone laughed again. Hart let the sound wash over her. Ruth would love these people, she was sure. Hart glanced back at the cave entrance. The dusk was deepening. Moonsilver and Avamere had gone back inside. Zim ladled stew into a bowl. Then he scooped in clean snow to cool it. Tell him not to eat it, he said to Hart. Why? She frowned, puzzled. To see if he really listens to you. Kip, Hart said, somberly as Zim set the bowl in front of him. Don't touch it, please. Kip looked sad, but he didn't move. The gypsies stared, then applauded. You have the gift, Zim said approvingly. He caught Hart's eye. Tell him it's his. You can eat it, Kip, she said quietly. Kip buried his muzzle in the bowl, lapping noisily. Are the horses trained like this? Zim asked her. Hart shrugged. The horses are smart too. Moonsilver is shy. The colt? Zim interrupted. Hart nodded. I'm surprised he stands for the gum spirit and the goat horn. Hart hoped he couldn't see her blushing in the soft dusk. I mean, he's shy with everyone but me, she explained. Would it be all right with him if we slept inside the cave, do you think? Davy asked. She shivered and grinned. Hart glanced around at the eager faces. It was getting chilly. Benny was ladling stew, and Hart knew it was for her. Of course, she said slowly. Zim pulled a silver flute from beneath his coat. He began to play. The melody was like rainwater, quick and clear. Hart stared at his fingers. The firelight polished the silver flute into gold. Do you play? Zim asked when he finished the tune. Hart shook her head. I will teach you if you like. Hart nodded, smiling. She ate fast. The gypsies were standing, stretching. They were gathering their blankets and carry sacks. It was nearly dark as they trudged up the hill behind Hart. She was grateful. The unicorns came to the entrance when they heard the voices. Avamere led Moonsilver to stand in the meadow while the gypsies settled in for the night. Hart moved her things to the front of the cave. It was strange to hear so many voices inside it. One by one, they quieted, calling good night to her. Only when it was silent did the unicorns come back to the cave. She waited until they had lain down just inside the entrance. Kip curled up between them. Then, being as quiet as she could, Hart went through with her carry sack. She finally found the empty cheese tin. She placed it beside her blankets and lay down to wait. She bit her at her lip to keep from falling asleep. She had to wait for the moon to rise, and she had to be careful. Even one of the gypsies heard her leave the cave, it would ruin everything. When the moon finally came up, Hart tiptoed out quietly so that even Kip did not waken. She used clean snow to scrub out the little cheese tin. Then she made her way shivering to the edge of the woods. Working in the pale light, she found a thick gob of pine sap oozing from a limb low enough to reach. She scraped it into the tin. Back in the cave, she held the closed tin against her belly to warm it. When the pine gum was softened, she gently wakened Moonsilver. "Hold still," she begged him. "Hush." She smeared a circle of the sticky pine gum around the base of his horn. Then she lightly kissed his muzzle and put the tin away. She managed to doze a little, but she dreamed that she was running uphill. She woke up breathing hard as though the steep rocky hillside of her dream had been real. She lay still until the gypsies rose at daybreak. Then she got up. The unicorns moved away to the meadow, pawing up grass to eat. Heart thought the tree gum looked perfect. No one else seemed to notice. The gypsies sang as they broke camp. The bells on their sashes jingled. The children chased each other, laughing. Heart packed her carry sack. It did not take long. All of her possessions fit inside. Kip stood close to her as the gypsies left the cave. The children stared wide at Moonsilver, giggling. Benny and Zim smiled broadly. "Do you need help?" Fiona asked on her way past Heart. Davy was right behind her. Heart shook her head, and then they went on. "Moonsilver was a baby when we found this place," Heart whispered to Avamere once they were alone. "Now he's nearly as tall as you are." Avamere's breath smelled like sweet grass. "I'm afraid," Heart said softly. Avamere nudged her shoulder, then whinnied softly at Moonsilver. Heart watched the colt canter up, then slide to a halt. She laughed. "You two aren't scared, are you?" She took Ruth's little woven bag from her pocket and opened it to touch the silver threads. Heart caught her breath. Simon's threads had knotted themselves into a circle with Ruth's. How? "Heart!" Davy's shout made her whirl around. She pushed the silvery circle back inside the woven bag. She stared down the mountain. Kip at her heels. Started down the mountain. Kip at her heels. Avamere followed. Moonsilver cantered in a wide arc, then caught up. Heart wondered what the gypsies would think. The unicorns never had on a rope or a halter. She wouldn't be able to make them act like horses. Maybe the gypsies would think she had trained them. Heart could hear gypsies singing and talking. They had hidden their wagon in the trees. They were moving them back onto the road now. Heart took a deep breath and stepped out of the forest. The unicorns were right behind her. Sighs and murmurs rose from the gypsies. Moonsilver was beautiful, even with the sticky ring of pine sap on his snowy white forehead. Avamere was stately, like a queen in a story. Both were more graceful than any horse ever born. Heart was uneasy standing out in the open. She was used to hiding. What if Tin Blackaby's men came galloping up? Glancing around, she recognized a flat-topped white boulder. Heart sighed. This was where she was supposed to meet Ruth next time. Avamere and Moonsilver drifted back into the trees. They began to paw at the snow. Kip ran to meet a small black dog tagging after Fiona. "Sadie won't fight," Fiona called. "We'll all watch out for Kip." "Heart?" She turned. Davy was pointing at the unicorns. Benny wondered, "Don't they just wander off?" Heart shook her head. "Never." Davy smiled. "That horn looks amazing from a distance. Maybe you won't need to learn to wire walk." He waved and went back to help the men who were rolling wagons back onto the road. The sun was coming up. It made the wagons shine. Each was painted differently with bright patterns sweeping along its sides. Benny's was meadow flower blue. Heart watched the laughing gypsies, her own spirit sinking lower and lower. Ruth would look for her. Then she would worry. Heart watched a girl her age standing on a box to fasten harness buckles. Some of the children were gathering pine cones. Older ones brought buckets of icy creek water to fill the oaken barrels on the wagons. Heart saw a glimmer of silver in the frozen mud. It was a tiny gypsy bell fallen from someone's sash. She scooped it up, smiling. Maybe there was a way to let Ruth know she was with the gypsies. Hart took the circle of silver thread out of its woven bag and put it on her wrist like a bracelet. Then she put the bell in Ruth's little woven bag. She found a stone the size of a supper plate and pried it loose from the frozen ground. Glancing around, she made sure no one was watching her. Then she placed the little bag on the white boulder and hid it with the smaller rock. Hart glanced around again. No one had seen her. She walked back toward the wagon.